On May 22, 2022, at exactly 10:17 in the morning, a camera recorded its final moments on the mountain known as K2. The footage was captured in a section called the Bottleneck, a notoriously narrow and dangerous corridor of ice, at an altitude of 26,903 feet. That is over 8 kilometers straight up, an altitude where commercial airliners cruise. The man holding the camera was Jason Robert Callahan. He was 37 years old, an American architect from San Diego, California. At that moment, he was standing in one of the deadliest places on Earth, completely unaware that his life would be measured in seconds. That morning, everything had gone according to plan. Jason Robert Callahan was part of a large team composed of 10 climbers and 5 high-altitude guides who were making their descent after a successful summit push. Their strategy was simple and proven: leave the highest camp before midnight, reach the top by early morning, and be back down to safety before the afternoon sun could destabilize the ice. The conditions were deceptively perfect. The temperature was 26 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, a cold so profound it could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Yet the sun was bright, and the wind was only a whisper at 15 miles per hour. Before we uncover how this perfect day turned into a tragedy, we would love to know where you are watching from, so please leave a comment below. If you find these stories of survival and human decisions compelling, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more. Now, back to the mountain, where an irreversible chain of events was already in motion. This was not the journey of an unprepared amateur. Jason Robert Callahan had invested $67,000 into this single expedition. He had trained relentlessly for 16 months, transforming his body into a machine capable of surviving the upper limits of the atmosphere. He was surrounded by a team of 14 other experienced individuals, using the best equipment money could buy. Years of dedication, thousands of hours of training, and a small fortune were all focused on this one goal. But all of it would be undone by a single decision that lasted just 4 minutes and 38 seconds. 16 months of perfect preparation rendered meaningless by 278 seconds of flawed judgment. To understand how a man so prepared could make such a choice, we have to go back. We have to understand who Jason Robert Callahan was, and the powerful promise that brought him to that exact spot. Jason Robert Callahan was born in Portland, Oregon on the 5th of March, 1985. He was the only child of 2 public school teachers, a background that instilled in him a quiet discipline and a deep respect for structure. By profession, he was an architect, but not just any architect. He was a senior partner at a major firm in San Diego, where he designed massive, environmentally friendly skyscrapers that reshaped city skylines. His work earned him an annual salary of around $250,000, a sum that granted him the freedom to pursue his true passion without the need for sponsors. He was a man who built monuments of glass and steel in the civilized world, yet found his soul in the untamed wilderness of rock and ice. His life was a study in contrasts between the safety of meticulous blueprints and the unpredictable chaos of the world's highest peaks. He was a man forged by early tragedy. When Jason Robert Callahan was just 19 years old, his parents were killed in a car accident, leaving him utterly alone. This loss shaped him into a fiercely self-sufficient and resilient individual. He poured his energy into his studies and later his career. He had been married for 6 years to Rachel Callahan, a woman who shared his love for the outdoors. They lived in a modern apartment in the La Jolla neighborhood of San Diego, with a clear view of the Pacific Ocean. His meticulous nature became legendary among his climbing partners. Before every major ascent, he would check each piece of his equipment 3 separate times, once the night before, again in the morning, and a final, deliberate inspection just before committing to the mountain. It was a ritual born from the knowledge that in his world there was no room for error. His journey into the world of high-altitude mountaineering began relatively late. At the age of 26, a friend convinced him to join a guided climb of Mount Rainier in Washington. He had never experienced anything like it. Standing on that glaciated summit, surrounded by a sea of clouds, something inside him shifted permanently. The controlled world of architecture suddenly felt small. From that day forward, his progression was methodical and safe. He started with smaller peaks, learning the craft, respecting the process. He wasn't a daredevil chasing adrenaline. He was a student, patiently accumulating experience, understanding that mountains demanded respect far more than courage. Each climb was a lesson, each summit a new chapter in a story he was writing for himself, one carefully chosen mountain at a time, moving ever higher. Over the next 11 years, Jason Robert Callahan built an impressive resume of climbs. He stood atop Mont Blanc in June of 2013, followed by Kilimanjaro in August of 2015. He conquered Aconcagua, the highest peak in South America, in January of 2017, and the brutally cold Denali in North America in May of 2019. His first foray into the Himalayas was a successful summit of Mount Everest in May of 2021. He was not just a weekend enthusiast, he had invested in his skills, completing a demanding course in the French Alps where he learned advanced ice climbing and rescue techniques. His experience was deep, earned over years of patient effort. He understood the risks, he had seen the dangers, and he had always chosen the path of caution and preparation. But his motivation for climbing K2 was not about ticking another box on a list. It was rooted in a promise, a vow made out of profound love. At their wedding in 2016, he and his wife Rachel, also a passionate mountaineer, had promised to climb the highest mountain on every continent together. It was to be their life's great shared adventure. But in 2018, their world was shattered. Rachel was diagnosed with a rapidly progressing form of multiple sclerosis that soon left her unable to walk. The shared dream seemed to die with her mobility. But Jason Robert Callahan refused to let it go. The promise was transformed. If she could not climb with him, he would climb for her. He would be her eyes, her legs, her presence on the roof of the world. This sacred promise manifested in a series of unbreakable rituals. Before every summit attempt, he would sit alone in his tent and read the last letter Rachel had written him, its pages worn from travel and kept in a waterproof bag close to his heart. He always tied a small blue silk ribbon, the exact color of his wife's eyes, around the handle of his ice axe. Beneath his layers of high-tech clothing, hanging from a silver chain against his skin, was a small locket containing a photo from their wedding day. Before leaving for Pakistan, he recorded a video for his social media, holding Rachel's hands. Looking directly into the camera, his voice thick with emotion, he made a public declaration. "I'm coming back. I always come back to you." That promise became the engine driving him up the savage mountain. To honor that promise, Jason Robert Callahan prepared for K2 with an obsessive focus. For 16 months, he trained under the supervision of a former professional mountaineer. 5 nights a week, he slept in a special tent that simulated high altitude, forcing his body to adapt to thin air. His physical training was brutal, 4 weekly sessions of high-intensity cardio, and long weekends spent climbing ice and rock in the Sierra Nevada mountains, always carrying a 66-pound pack. He invested $67,000 of his own money into the expedition and took a 3-month sabbatical from his job. He had done everything right in his preparation. He was physically peaked, mentally steeled, and emotionally driven. But the mountain does not read resumes, and it does not care about promises. The day of the summit push began in the profound, freezing dark of the high Himalayas. At precisely 11 o'clock the previous night, on the 21st of May, Jason Robert Callahan and the 14 other members of his team left the relative safety of Camp 4. Their headlamps cut sharp, lonely circles of light against an endless expanse of ice and rock. The plan, drilled into them for weeks, was a model of high-altitude strategy. Climb through the coldest, most stable hours of the night, reach the summit no later than 8 o'clock in the morning, and begin the descent immediately. This would give them a crucial buffer of daylight to navigate the most dangerous sections on their return, well before the afternoon sun could awaken the ice above. The air was still and the temperature held at a stable 26 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, a cold so absolute it felt like a physical presence against their skin. The ascent was arduous but flawless. For 9 straight hours, the team moved in a disciplined, rhythmic line, a chain of human determination against the vast indifference of the mountain. They were a collection of controlled sounds in the immense silence, the crunch of metal points biting into the ice, the hiss of oxygen regulators, and the deep, labored rhythm of their own breathing. Jason Robert Callahan felt strong. His body responded exactly as his 16 months of training had conditioned it to. As the first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, painting the surrounding peaks in shades of orange and purple, a wave of profound euphoria washed over him. They had done it. They had fulfilled his promise. He thought of Rachel, imagining her seeing this through his eyes. But the discipline of the mountain is relentless. The summit is not the end. It is the halfway point. After just 15 minutes on top, the order came to begin the descent. The most dangerous part of the journey was only just beginning, a fact that can be easily forgotten in the triumphant haze of success, at an altitude where judgment is the first thing to decay. The team began their careful journey back down, the fatigue of the ascent now settling deep into their muscles. The sun was higher in the sky, its radiation surprisingly intense, creating a dangerous illusion of warmth. Jason Robert Callahan felt a powerful urge to linger, to capture every possible angle, to absorb every detail for the wife he had left behind. His pace began to slow slightly, falling just a few feet behind his personal guide. It was an almost imperceptible change, but on K2, inches and seconds matter. In his deep satisfaction, he was forgetting something. He was carrying an item he had intentionally concealed from his guide, an object that went directly against the expedition's most fundamental safety protocol. A small choice, made weeks ago in the comfort of his home, was about to intersect with the brutal physics of the death zone. The expedition leader, a veteran Norwegian guide named Henrik Johansson, had been unequivocal during the final briefing at Camp 4. His rule was absolute, born from seeing too many tragedies unfold. Above 26,000 feet, he had said, his voice firm, there are to be no personal distractions, none. Your only job on the way down is to get down. Your summit pictures are taken, your goal is done. The mountain will kill you the second you think you've beaten it. The history of these peaks was written in the stories of climbers who, clouded by euphoria and exhaustion, lost focus for just a few critical moments. It was a rule designed to protect against the most dangerous variable on any mountain, the fallibility of the human mind under extreme pressure. As they descended, the warnings began to accumulate, quiet at first, then increasingly urgent. A radio call crackled from base camp, Henrik's voice cutting through the static. Descending team, the temperature at the base has risen 2 degrees in the last hour. Get out of the bottleneck now. Closer by, his Sherpa Fazal Ali, a man with 8 K2 summits to his name, noticed Jason Robert Callahan pausing to adjust his camera. Don't stop here, Jason, Fazal said, his voice muffled by his oxygen mask. This is the killing place. But the words seemed to float past him, lost in the thin air and the private narrative of his promise. Hypoxia, even in its mildest form, acts as a gentle anesthetic, sanding the sharp edges off of fear and consequence, replacing them with a misplaced sense of control. Finally, they stood at the entrance to the bottleneck. It was a place that felt intrinsically wrong, a feature of unnatural menace. Below them, a narrow 330-foot-long corridor of ice plunges downwards at a steep 45-degree angle. The fixed safety ropes, their only lifeline, snaked down its length, disappearing into the shadows. And hanging directly above it all was the Serac, a cliff of millions of tons of ice, shimmering under the morning sun like a suspended guillotine. Every instinct screamed to move quickly, to pass through this corridor of immense and obvious danger without a moment's hesitation. Jason Robert Callahan was now just minutes away from this deadliest section of the climb, carrying a secret, and about to make a choice that would render all his preparation, all his experience, and all his promises utterly meaningless. The bottleneck is not just a feature on a mountain, it is a flaw in its design, a natural trap set for anyone who dares to climb into the thin air. It is a narrow corridor of ice and snow, stretching for approximately 330 feet. Its slope is a relentless 40 to 50 degrees, steeper than the steepest residential staircase you have ever seen. Below this treacherous path is a sheer drop of over 2,300 feet down the mountain's southern face, a fall from which there is no survival. But the true danger is not what lies below, it is what hangs silently and menacingly above. A gigantic serac, a cliff of millions of tons of ice, clings to the mountain. It is a suspended catastrophe, the size of multiple office buildings, waiting for a reason to let go. This place is defined by its history, a ledger written in loss. On 1st of August 2008, the mountain collected its deadliest payment at this exact spot. A massive section of the Serac collapsed without warning, unleashing a torrent of ice and snow. In a matter of hours, 11 climbers were killed, their lifelines severed, their journeys ended in an instant. It remains the single most tragic day in the history of K2, a permanent and chilling reminder of the objective dangers that exist here. The mountain does not negotiate, and the Serac does not issue warnings. It simply obeys the laws of physics, indifferent to the hopes, dreams, and promises of the tiny figures moving beneath it. This history is not just a story. For every climber, it is a visceral, ever-present threat. The science behind the danger is both simple and terrifying. During the day, the intense solar radiation at such high altitude begins to warm the surface of the ice, even when the air temperature is dozens of degrees below zero.
This warmth creates internal meltwater, which seeps deep into the fissures and cracks within the Serac.
This water acts as a lubricant, weakening the bonds that hold the millions of tons of ice together. Gravity, a constant and unforgiving force, pulls relentlessly downward. Eventually, a critical point is reached, where the weakened structure can no longer support its own immense weight. The collapse is not a question of if, but when. It is a ticking clock, and the sun is the mechanism that winds it every single day. Because of this constant lethal threat, there is one absolute, unwritten rule known to every single person who attempts K2. In the bottleneck, you do not stop. You do not pause to rest, you do not adjust your gear, and you certainly do not stop to take a picture. You move as quickly as your oxygen-deprived body will allow, aiming to cross the entire 330-foot section in 18 to 25 minutes. This is not a rule of courage, but of mathematics. Every second spent under the shadow of that serac is an entry in a deadly lottery. The longer you remain in the corridor, the greater the statistical probability that you will be there when the mountain decides to call your number. It is a race against time, physics, and the sun itself. At precisely 10:17 in the morning, at an altitude of 26,903 feet, Jason Robert Callahan made his choice. He was in the very heart of the bottleneck, the safest path a thin treading line against a wall of rock, connected to a fixed rope. But the view was perfect. The sun illuminated K2's iconic peak behind him, a once-in-a-lifetime image. Fueled by the euphoria of the summit and the deep need to create a unique memory for his wife, he made the decision. With a deliberate motion, he reached for the metal safety device connecting him to the lifeline and unclipped. The sound was a small metallic click, almost insignificant in the vastness, yet it was the sound of a promise being broken. He stepped away from the security of the fixed rope. He moved approximately 10 feet out onto a small platform of snow that he believed was stable. He was now completely untethered, standing on a 45-degree slope of ice with a 2,300-foot drop just a few steps away. His intention was singular, to record a special personal video message for Rachel, something more profound than the quick, breathless broadcast from the summit. In his mind, clouded by the gentle but undeniable effects of low oxygen, this was a calculated risk. He believed his 11 years of experience gave him the right to manage a few minutes of exposure, a few minutes to create an unforgettable memory. The other climbers and Sherpas continued their descent, a slow-moving line of bright colors against the white ice. They passed him, some shouting warnings that were snatched away by the thin air. His own Sherpa, Fazal Ali, already 33 feet below, yelled up at him, his voice a desperate plea. "Jason, no, get back on the rope, you're crazy." Jason Robert Callahan simply raised a gloved hand, giving a thumbs up to signal that everything was under control. He turned his back to them, reached into his downsuit, and pulled out the small camera. He pressed the power button. A tiny red light began to blink, and the countdown on his life began. 10 seconds passed. He framed the shot, the magnificent peak perfectly centered behind him. 20 seconds. He took a deep, regulated breath, preparing to speak. 30 seconds. A few small pieces of ice, no bigger than pebbles, skittered down from the serac high above, a common occurrence he barely registered. 1 minute. He began to speak to the lens, his words for Rachel alone, a private message delivered from one of the most public and dangerous stages on Earth. 2 minutes. The sun felt deceptively warm on his face, a dangerous lie that masked the ambient temperature of 26 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. He stood there for a total of 4 minutes and 38 seconds. 278 seconds of flawed judgment that would erase 16 months of perfect preparation. Then it came. A sound that did not belong in the sky. A deep, guttural roar that seemed to come from the very core of the mountain. A sound like deep thunder. 755 feet directly above his position, a massive section of the serac, an incomprehensible weight of approximately 990 tons of ice, finally surrendered to gravity. The mountain had made its move. And then, exactly as you saw at the beginning of this video, his head snapped upward. The physics of the event granted him 11 seconds between the sound and the impact. The camera recorded it all. His eyes widened in absolute, undiluted terror as he saw a white cloud of churning snow and ice blocks the size of cars cascading down towards him. He tried to speak one last time, a final message for the woman he had climbed for. His last recorded words were a single, desperate cry, cut short by the violence of the impact. "Rachel, I'm sorry." The avalanche struck him at an estimated speed of 80 miles per hour. The kinetic force was beyond comprehension, an unstoppable wave of solid matter that ripped him from his stance and launched him violently into the void.
He was no longer a climber. He was just an object, subject to the brutal and unforgiving laws of physics. The small camera, miraculously, continued to record, its red light blinking in the chaos, a silent witness to the final moments of the man who held it. The fall lasted for 29 seconds, a 2,560-foot descent down the sheer southern face of the mountain. The audio is a horrifying testament to the event. The deafening roar of the snow, the high-pitched whistle of the wind as his body accelerated through the thin air, and the sickening, dry sounds of his body striking unseen rock outcroppings during the descent. It was a fall through space and time, a long journey measured in heartbeats he no longer had. The end was abrupt. His body came to a sudden final rest in the deep, blue darkness of a glacial crevasse, at an altitude of approximately 24,278 feet. The camera recorded a few more seconds of darkness and the sound of settling snow before its battery finally died. The impact and the subsequent fall had caused massive internal injuries and multiple fractures, physical damages that were utterly incompatible with life. The promise was broken. Jason Robert Callahan was not coming home. The reaction from below was instantaneous. His Sherpa, Fazal Ali, who had witnessed the entire event unfold, screamed into his radio, his voice cracking with horror and disbelief. A desperate message to base camp. "Avalanche in the bottleneck. Jason's been hit. He's gone." But in the lethal altitudes of K2, there is no such thing as an emergency rescue. Above 26,000 feet, the air is too thin for helicopters to generate lift, rendering them useless. Sending a team of climbers on foot into the direct path of the same unstable serac that had just unleashed its fury was not a rescue mission. It was a suicide pact. The heartbreaking decision was made in minutes. The Madison Mountaineering Expedition was officially over. The remaining team members, their triumph on the summit now a hollow, bitter memory, began their slow, silent descent, leaving a piece of their team and their hearts behind on the savage mountain. For 17 long days, the mountain held its secret. Jason Robert Callahan's body remained lost, swallowed by the vast frozen landscape. It was only when a subsequent expedition used a high-altitude drone to survey the area that a flash of bright color was spotted deep within a crevasse. His final resting place had been found. Recovery, however, was deemed far too dangerous. 23 days after the accident, a Pakistani team clearing old ropes from the route made a discovery that was almost unbelievable. A few feet from the edge of the crevasse, partially exposed by the slow grinding movement of the glacier, was the small camera. Miraculously, it was intact. The memory card held the full, unedited record of the tragedy, the unfinished message to his wife, the 11 seconds of dawning, conscious terror, and the full 29 seconds of the violent fall. The camera, and the terrible truth it contained, was eventually delivered to his widow, Rachel Callahan. After viewing the final moments of her husband's life, she made a decision of incredible strength. She authorized the release of the footage, accompanied by a simple, powerful message that would echo throughout the climbing community. Let his final mistake serve to save others. No picture is worth a life. Officially declared lost on the mountain, Jason Robert Callahan's body was never recovered. He became one of the more than 80 souls who remain permanently on K2, a silent guardian of the peak he climbed for love, and a permanent tragic testament to the fine line between a promise kept and a promise broken. Jason Robert Callahan did not die simply because K2 is a dangerous mountain. He died because of a precise sequence of small cascading decisions, each one amplifying the risk of the last. First, there was the conscious choice to unclip from the fixed safety rope, severing his only physical connection to the mountain's lifeline. Second, the decision to step 10 feet away from the established path, trading proven security for a better camera angle. Third, the active dismissal of 5 separate, increasingly urgent warnings from his experienced guide and expedition leader. And finally, the choice to remain stationary for 4 minutes and 38 seconds in a place where the most fundamental rule is to never stop moving. Each individual action, viewed in isolation through the lens of summit euphoria and oxygen-starved judgment, might have seemed like a calculated risk. But together, they formed an unbreakable chain of causality, leading directly to a single, inevitable outcome. His story is a chilling reflection of a universal human flaw, the quiet voice in our heads that whispers, "Just one more minute," or the dangerous confidence that believes, "It will not happen to me." It is the tendency to ignore clear signs when we are heavily invested in an outcome, and the profound belief that our experience makes us an exception to the rule. But the mountain does not negotiate. It does not care about promises, experience, or the depth of one's love. There are no second takes in the death zone, no room for even a single error.
The ultimate tragedy is that the greatest act of love Jason Robert Callahan could have offered was not creating one last perfect memory, but simply fulfilling his most important promise, the one to come home. Jason Robert Callahan, 1985 to 2022. His story, and its hard-won lesson, will not be forgotten.